Okay, I know that folks are still joining us, but we want to make sure that our presenters have their full time and that we also don't go very much over time because time is valuable. And some of you are finished with your school year and some of you are still teaching. So keeping that in mind, and we have East Coast to West Coast, then we'll go ahead and get started. So good evening. My name is Jamila McWhorter, and I serve ACDA as chair of the Education and Communication National Standing Committee. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome you to this evening's webinar, Looking Forward, Inspiration for Revitalizing Your Middle School and High School Choirs. Our presenters tonight are Vincent Oakes, Gretchen Grace Harrison, and Chris Muntz. You may type questions into the chat feature during the presentations. Questions will be grouped together and answered at the end of each individual presentation or addressed at the end of all presentations as time allows. Please keep the chat free of any other comments and enter questions. If you are watching on Facebook Live, you may also enter questions on the Facebook Live feed. These will be addressed by the presenters after the webinar has concluded and over the next few days as their schedules allow. Now get ready to enjoy our first presentation from Vincent Oakes. He is choral director at Baylor Middle and High School and artistic director of the Chattanooga Boys Choir. He has also served as past ACDA Southern Region president. I have had the pleasure to work with him here in Tennessee, and I know you are going to gain some wonderful insights from his presentation entitled Changing Voice, Physiology, Pedagogy, Psychology Post-COVID. So Vic, welcome.
All right, I think I'm on. We'll do the Zoom thing. Thumbs up if you can see the slide. If you can help me with fantastic. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for letting me join you from Tennessee this evening. It's a joy to be with you, and I appreciate the invitation. And I do hope you notice on the first slide that post-COVID is very much in quotes, because I know that that can mean a lot of different things. We are certainly still in the midst of figuring out where we are as a society and what we will be doing as choirs. And I'm just thrilled to get back to whatever we get to get back to. And I'm grateful for all of you spending time, many of you in your summers, to figure out how to continue to do that. Right off the bat, quick story for you. Christmas 2019, my family gifted me with a beautiful bicycle, a hybrid mountain kind of 21 speed, lots of cool stuff. There was even a holder for my water bottle. So in the week following Christmas and before we got back to school in January of 2020, I rode that thing all throughout my neighborhood, just kind of testing it out, getting the gears right, getting the shifting right, figuring out how to brake around corners. It was replacing a bike that I'd gotten in graduate school 20 years earlier. So it was definitely due. And then 2020 happened, putting together a conference for 4,000 people. And then, COVID, which we've all been working through in whatever ways we've been doing that. And so that bike went into the garage, and it went further and further and further back into the garage. Then finally, July or so, when we thought we had a little bit of a handle on what we were doing, the bike came back out. Instead of riding around my neighborhood, we decided to try a pretty easy trail here in Chattanooga. I got back on the bike for the first time thinking, well, there's a reason why the expression is getting onto a bike, right? But I looked ridiculous. You would have thought, if you'd have seen me, that they'd just gotten my training wheels taken off for the first time. And I tell you that story because this is exactly what I think about with the changing adolescent voice through the last 15 months. They probably left us singing in March of 2020 thinking, all right, I like what I do. I love Mr. Muntz's class. We have a great time singing. And then we didn't see each other for 3, 6, 10, 12 weeks. Still haven't seen each other or had the chance to interact with each other face to face. And so you've been doing what you can do. Our singers, we hope, have been doing what they can do in whatever way they can interact with us. And we feel like, yes, I know how to ride a bike and I know how to sing. I've been singing since I was born. I've been riding a bike since I could remember, but things are different. The instrument, the voice, the bicycle is different now. The terrain is different. And so that's what we are about navigating. And if you can put some streamers on the side or a nice little basket or a fun bell, that's all granolas, as they say. So re-entry into the choir with our changing / adolescent, expanding, developing, emerging, evolving, whatever terminology you use. We do a lot of these kinds of sessions, and there's a lot of ways that we can go down a lot of different rabbit holes in this regard. Would love to explore any of those with you if you'd like. But for tonight, we're really focusing on what to do as we hit the ground running again in whatever way we will come August. As we heard earlier, physiology, we're going to focus a little bit on breath support, the onset and duration of phonation, exploring the range and what that means for that adolescent voice, timbre and tone, and then all the considerations about aural theory, things, because our singers are more than just the sounds they make, of course, in our choirs, and then considerations for voice part and repertoire, all in the next 17.5 minutes. So buckle in, it's going to be a lot of fun. Just so you know, I do have a few resources that I kind of spotlight as we go through, and they'll be available to you at the end of the presentation as well for you to get in any way and use up the rest of your budget if you still have any left for this school year. So physiology, going back to that bike analogy, you know, you started out on that 1-speed bike and now you're on a 10-speed or a 21-speed. Again, when you went from one bike to the next, you didn't forget how to ride a bike. You still pedal, you still balance, you still hold your hands out to give all the right signals. But we've added gears. And as we've gotten older, we've matured more. We've got these things that allow us to do more, but getting there gets a little bit more tricky. Think about the first time you had to switch gears on your bicycle. Same kind of thinking with the voice. The difference is from 60, 70 years ago, we don't just stop riding the bike. We don't just stop singing, as was what was often taught 60 or 70 years ago. Now we know enough about science, and we know enough about pedagogy, and we have repertoire and other things built into our profession to help us singing healthily through that. And that's why Bridget Sweet's comment from her most recent book, Thinking Outside the Voice Box, is so important. It's a difficult, complex process that I would add is also very inconsistent, not the same from one person to the next. And so your careful guiding, understanding, and trusting hand will be so important to keep them singing through this storm and stress of the adolescent voice change. So physiology, any resources will tell you the basics of what happens, the thickening and the lengthening of the vocal folds, all the adjustments that happen and that go on. But it's also important that we let the students know that this is what's happening, to be real about it. You know, it's not just moving from a half size to a 3/4 to a full size violin. It's all happening inside. And so we've got to somehow help them understand that it's not some mystical Harry Potterish thing that's happening that they just hope they wake up on the right side of the bed on the next day they have choir. We really want to help them know that it's a real thing. The vocal folds elongate and thicken, the muscles, the cartilage, the ligaments, those are all going through changes as well, so that we're not just thinking in terms of, I have these notes, I have these notes, I have these notes, I have these notes. Instead, it's just going around. And that it's not just about the specifically the vocal folds and the larynx as well. There's all the supporting structures, how we breathe, how we align our posture to sing. Those are often, they affect each other. Oftentimes, if we're having difficulty with our voice, we might back off of our posture. We might under support with our breath. And so it's important to reinforce all those principles that we've been teaching even before we started hearing or feeling these different notes. The thing I preach to everybody that will listen to me, the only consistent thing about the voice change is inconsistency. There are books from the 60s and the 70s that will talk about this is where 6th graders are, this is where 7th graders are, this is what 8th graders are doing. I've pretty much thrown out that playbook a long time ago. Number one, I'll have kids in the same grade level that are 16, 18 months apart sometimes. And also we just know that people are just maturing and science is doing that as well. So it's a little bit, I would say, inconsistent to just necessarily label, well, you're in 7th grade and it's February, so this is where you are right now. Not so much the case. Pitfalls that we experience, the tilted chin, the overexertion, or the timidity and withdrawal that leads to underexertion. And then what happens is we can define a negative self-worth. I'll tell you, that day that I tried that bike out in July one day, I just wanted to pack it up and go home because my 9-year-old was outdoing me by a ton. But I needed to keep going. And thankfully, I had my 9-year-old to teach me how to do that. So breath support and inhalation, a couple of quick examples that have really just helped out this year. We've been washing our hands nonstop for the last 15 months. And so this is not an unusual thing to feel like you're washing your hands, get your energy together, and then you throw your hands down to get as much water off of them as you can. If those go down near your waist level, that's that low feeling of supported active breath. And if we're going to want to put our energy somewhere, put it in the breath. A belt full of noses. Yes, I actually own one of these. In my classroom, a bunch of plastic noses that I put onto a belt. Oriental trading website and a credit card and a glass of wine is a bad combination. So I have these plastic noses attached to a belt that I will put on to remind them that low belt level breathing is where we need to have our most full and relaxed breath to come in from. That seems like something we would typically want to make sure we know at any stage. But with the adolescent voice change, there's this feeling of overdoing and making happen versus allowing to happen. That reinforced effort on inhalation will help be a guiding principle through the rest of what we're doing. So breath support continuing with continuous exhalation. Singing has been described by many people as exhalation on pitch. And so how we let the air out and how we focus that is of particular importance during the adolescent voice change. I used to always talk about letting the breath out like you're blowing out candles on a birthday cake. I've kind of changed that to a little bit of a focused idea. One cupcake candle that's in the back of the room. So going from to something more direct and focusing our tone that way. Because again, if we're talking about a time when we're kind of letting whatever come out, I'm blowing out, it's coming out there. We want to focus that. Same as going from a dartboard to a specific target. I actually have a dartboard on the wall in my choir room that I will say, you missed a little bit to the right. Let's really focus towards the bullseye. And that has always helped a lot to help visualize that. So once we've taken in a good breath, once we're prepared to let breath out on purpose, the onset of phonation, the beginning of our sound. Again, any of the method books that you'll read, you can consult about these, and I'm a big fan, but I do have a bit of a methodology that I'll use, and I think it's extremely important as we come out of COVID that we are able to find students where they are along this journey. It's a really rough kind of from top to bottom progression where I do start oftentimes with unpitched exercises. You've probably heard about all these, creating the sound of an owl, the hooty sound of sirens, woo, or woo, which is great for loosening up and lightening the voice. And they're also important, I think, and I can't stress this enough, that they are unpitched to start. I've seen the face of a 12-year-old who knows that they just don't quite get it yet. Or maybe they see the look on the face of the director and they're responding to someone wrinkling their nose or saying, that's not quite right. Well, then they've just internalized, I don't have it, so maybe I should try something else. So having something unpitched that they can feel the sensation, that they can feel the phonation and the breath direction is really important. But now you can begin from that place and begin to try to approximate that on pitch. So the second level that I have there is the stormtrooper sound. As you know, Star Wars stormtroopers, they're horrible marksmen, but they would make that sound that you want to recreate, that do, 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 do. Now that has a more pronounced beginning than the hooty owl or the siren. And I like that for helping students kind of place the pitch. And you can have them point to the wall. All right, go like this. Then they do, 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 do. Great, now do this one. Do, do, do. And they repeat back to you, do, do, do. So they're already thinking in terms of low, high, and medium. And then eventually the third one you see listed there towards pitched exercises, give them a place to land. Call on their aural skills and say, all right, I want us to end here. Start above and go down. Do. Now you might hear this instead. But eventually, hopefully they get there, and that time in between is shortened, and you'll find that they already are tuning both their voices and their ears towards that effect. And finally, that makes its way towards some quick pitched exercises. Just repeat back to me, do, do. And if they've had the experience of creating sound, of freely phonating, of having a bit of an attack, I should probably find a different word than that though, of a beginning, then they'll be able to make their way towards feeling more successful in that pitch matching. So range exploration, and I do drop in, if you'll go back in the webinar from National Conference, Aaron Plisco and Daniel Gutierrez's fantastic presentation on embracing the crack. Not only is it wonderfully titled, but it's an incredible session on this very thing about feeling comfortable in the expansion of exploring the range. You see up there the picture of a slinky. The first one is closed in its most compact form. The second one is where the top and the bottom are strong, but the middle is what's up for question. That is the adolescent voice in two pictures. All right, when we're younger, it's a much more compact, more solid combination, and that when we move along, we still have our top. We still have our bottom. It's the middle that gets so shaky and that gets to be uncertain, and where we find most of our time trying to help our students aggress and to progress and to help make that middle a little less wavy and a little more solid from top to bottom. So that's where we get to spend all of our fun time. As a part of that, there are definitely ways to kind of start with the first part and make your way towards exploration through the repertoire. So if you've got slides of a fifth that you've made your way to, ooh, 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 great. Let's all look at measure 4 of 900 miles. Ooh, I walk. Or I maybe go down to the minor third that begins that one. I am, ooh, ooh, and just make that sound back. Or just start minor thirds and make your way down till you get to the F A flat, the actual one in the beginning of the song. And you'll find that that they'll be able to when they've had the chance to experience the pitches, to experience the notes in an easier, I guess, less consequence-filled setting, that they'll be able to recreate them on the repertoire as well. And so what a freeing and empowering feeling that is. So slides of a third, ooh, and then skip, ooh, 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 and then eventually I am. And then do the same for the fifth. I am walking. So sliding, making its way to something more to the skip, and just recreating almost artificially, but or at least out of context, not artificially, but the very same exercise that they're going to create happen on the repertoire. I take the time to say that because this is a very consistent part of that phonation difficulty. Sometimes we can, at the adolescent, changing voice has no difficulty at all within the octave or 10th or 12th or so when you do the voice check, and they've got the notes, but it's that inconsistency in the middle. And I want you to think about that the next time you've given a sight reading factory exercise that starts on the middle C for an adolescent singer who might sing the F below beautifully and the octave above that. And they can do that on an octave slide or the scale, but coming in the middle is what's tricky. And so that's where exercises like this can help a lot. So the next part is about what it is you're hearing, the timbre and the tone, spoken versus sung. And I like to use this gesture a lot. Andrew Ramsey uses the kind of whining sound, Mom, I want a new phone. And it kind of has that projected, that forward sound. I use, are you kidding me? And the reason why I use that is because, number one, every teenager has said it at some point in their life, and probably the last week, and it has a lot of up and down in it. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And it just has that forward place that helps. That's a natural feeling that you want to help them to recreate in their singing. The index finger to the forehead, Jonathan Pallant uses that a lot in that idea, and several others, but it's such a great visual. I like to use in my rehearsals an index card. Everyone has them in their folders, and they put it in front of their mouths here, and I will simply say to them, all right, I want you to sing 50% above and 50% below. That was a pretty good mix. All right, let's try 80 below, 20 above. And that's going to be a little more back and a little more earthy. And then I'll say, all right, 80 above and 20 below. Ah, and that's about the right mixture usually of lightness, but also enough power and strength underneath to get to wherever we need. And finally, what I have found to be very successful with some of my singers that came back to me after being away for the fall or being away for any significant amount of time in these last few months, it's kind of that really back tone that kind of settles in the back. And so I say, all right, let's try and sing it. And then I get this kind of barely audible or barely beyond speaking, and has trouble having presence, presence. And so what I've found, and I want everybody to try this if you could at home, take your tongue and find your soft palate towards the back. And what we're going to do is you're going to sing an NG and just move your tongue forward to the hard palate. Where your tongue is just behind your top row of teeth. That quick little exercise has helped many a 14-year-old find their voice again when they thought it was lost somewhere in their speaking range. Continuing on, finding that bright tone, that full tone. Again, we want it to flow from you, not force it out and allow it to come out. A free tone versus making it, and using terminology like float the sound instead of pushing the tone. I have used our summer camps, and I will use again in August when we come back. If you can float me a sound, we will have root beer floats at the end of rehearsal. Now that happens usually in August because there's nothing better in the third or fourth week of August than a root beer float. So if they can float that sound to me. One caution about this, we talk a lot about vocal modeling, and it's in all the texts as well. Be mindful of the fact that when you are modeling pitches and also demonstrating repertoire, be careful of the tone and the timbre that you're using. And I particularly caution adult sopranos and adult altos who might be trying to demonstrate the sound for a new baritone. If you sound pressed, if your sound on an F3 is a little bit pushed, and you're just trying to do your best to help copy the pitch, the singer might also be copying your sound as well. I caution the other direction as well. I don't have a great falsetto, and I work with a 150-person boy choir every week, and I try to give pitches, and I always try to make sure they know, don't copy my sound, just copy the note. So just be a little more aware that the singers might be trying to not just copy the pitch, but they're also trying to copy the sound that you're making. So aural and music theory considerations. I try to avoid really being too much on pitch for the first couple of weeks with a lot of beginners, and I'm going to have a lot of beginners this fall. I had a lot of beginners in January. I let them think in terms of high, low, and medium to find it for themselves. So my first assignment back in January, and it'll probably be my first in August with my school choirs, is to let them use Flipgrid. And if you haven't used this yet, any video platform will do. But I say to them, sing me Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or say to me in your speaking voice, and we emulate and copy what a good speaking voice is that goes towards singing. Make me 3 5-second videos of you in your high voice, in your lowest part of your voice, and in the medium, most comfortable part of your voice. You can start to approximate that on pitch, and then eventually move that to where you're able to get a sense for what they know. And that's important that I mention the videos, because when they're at the piano with you and 50 kids sitting behind them, it's a very different result. And so you'll probably get a little better idea when they're able to isolate themselves a little bit. And that's also different than pushing a note on the piano and saying, all right, sing it here. All right, now sing it here. They just stumbled into your room. We want to give them every opportunity to succeed. And that includes those who were successful as treble singers and maybe aren't any longer and need that place, and they can experiment for themselves, high, medium, and low. Again, I can't say enough about the inaccurate and pattern singer. Sometimes we beat our heads against the wall trying to figure out ways to help them find the pitch when our singers have never really experienced having someone else match them. And by that, I simply say, instead of finding yourself frustrated that they can't match you, that they can't match the piano, I brought an electric keyboard, I tried to have them match that, they still couldn't match. They might not have felt the physical sensation of having anyone else match them. So start where they are. Say, all right, just hold what you would consider a low pitch, just hold it steady. All right, and now you match them. All right, now say, I'm not going to play a pitch, but just sing a higher one this time, and I'll match you. And in their new voice, in their new setup, they are hearing and feeling that sensation for probably the first time. So once they have felt that sensation, they'll want to recreate that. And so then they'll want to match the other singers or you if that's the case as well. And the number one thing I hear from teachers all around is about octave displacement. Do, 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 do. And it just happens so often. Again, they've got some really good ears on them, and they're trying to recreate whatever you're asking from them the only way they know how. And so I know in my choirs, we play the octave game all the time. And that's with everybody, every singer, every voice part, every grade level. Match me up an octave. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do-do. Sorry. Do-do-do, do-do-do. Or whatever it is, match me down. Do-do-do, do-do-do. And we'll make a game of it where I'll have individuals come up, and if they get it right, they get to take a shot in the recycling bin to make that happen. We do it by section, and we expand it, and then everybody has played around with octaves. Now, they don't know that I'm doing that for the purpose of the adolescent voice change. If they did, they'd roll their eyes and throw me out of the room. We just do it as part of our theory exercises. We're learning theory. We're learning what octaves are like. Recreate that up an octave, down an octave, whatever it might be. And then what I've done is I've secretly reinforced for those emerging adolescent singers their ability to hear something at an octave and get it into the correct one. And that's been really, really helpful. And then I've just a couple of quick theory considerations as well with that. What you can see on the top of your PowerPoint is the same pitch. D above middle C on the treble staff, on the bass staff, and on the octave treble staff, right? So imagine your new baritone or a tenor who might see this, and all of a sudden spatially, they're just having to jump around, and one looks high, one looks low, but it's actually the same note. Now, one would think that one might outgrow this after music degrees and singing all their life and everything. But the excerpt of music that you see, I encountered on Sunday, 2 days ago for the first time, and I was thrown. Love and serve each other for all eternity. Basses and tenors and altos were on the bottom of the two staves. And then we switched to the bass staff. And I had one of those moments. All eternity, lead on. Because all of a sudden I was now on the G that was written on the bass staff. Now I had a little bit of warning with that little teeny tiny bass staff to help me out, but it was moving along. Now imagine our 13, 14-year-old singer who was going through the same thing. And they're looking at it, well, fourth line this, second line this, first space that. It's a lot to overcome. Whether the classification system you might use is Cooper or Cooksey, whether you use the terminology of tenors and basses and baritones. Personally, my middle school choirs, they're all part 1, 2, and 3 to avoid those associations that are often attached about already being a soprano, alto, tenor, or bass. I understand, you know, in order to make repertoire happen, in order to make concerts occur, we have to assign people to voice parts. It's a necessary task, but proper, healthy, and confident voice building should never be the prominent thing compared to the repertoire demands. Sorry, let me restate that. The confident voice building should not take a back seat to the demands of the repertoire. If so, then we adjust the rep to equip and enable the singers. Wonderful resources that are available to you. Briley has a whole series of solo books for the emerging voice, both treble and for tenor bass singers, and then just a whole health of repertoire that's been written for choral arrangements that include positive and healthy ways to have these voices included at their strong spots. And this exercise is something we did in March with my mostly freshman choir for my tenors and basses. It comes from the Briley Stand with the Brave solo collection. They all learned this piece. And when it ends, it's Come Stand with the Brave, just jumping up. Now, what we used this for was to get everybody singing in comfortable, appropriate ranges, but it was all unison to reinforce what they were hearing with what they were singing. So for fun, we added harmony, and this was an experiment that they got to try. And so what you see there is harmony that they added for themselves once they were able to break themselves up into more traditional baritone tenor ranges. And this was a fantastic way to get them already feeling confident in the mechanism of singing, and then expand what they were hearing, and then eventually put it to use with what they were doing. And I got to check off the composition and improvisation box as well. But what a great way that we were able to include them in doing that, as they became confident in delivering the sound, and then they were able to adjust it to make their part that they delivered a little more representative of where they were vocally. Sing Dem Herren does the same thing in the sense that it's very comfortable within an octave, and over 70% of the notes all happening within a sixth. And you can move that around, and they can find a lot of power and a lot of strength by singing unison and singing canon beautifully. And so that's where I will leave it. Man, that was really fast. But I can't stress enough the idea that teaching music to adolescents requires great intuition, which means that we are very instinctive and we're hearing and we're listening, and yet we're very patient in order to deliver and execute the best instruction and repertoire that we can. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vic. We don't have any questions in the chat right now, but there was a lot to digest. So if you do have questions and you think of one that comes up as people are presenting, then go ahead and put them into the chat. And if we have time at the end, we will get to those. So our next presenter is Gretchen Grace Harrison, and she is recently retired, very recently retired, as choral director for Frontier Trails Middle School and is choral director for Allegro Choirs Kansas City. She currently serves ACDA as National Repertoire and Resources Chair. And I've known Gretchen and her family for many years. Her father, when I was a young choral director, her father was a mentor of mine, and I know he's watching this evening. So hi, Papa G. And I know you are going to gain excellent ideas from her presentation entitled Rebuilding Relationships. So Gretchen, it's all yours.
Thank you, thank you. I'm off mute, and I am going to share my screen with you. So give me 1 second. All right, are you seeing my presentation? Again, thumbs up. Oh, good, thanks, Vic. All right, well, just as Vic was absolutely brilliant about addressing that changing voice singer, and irregardless of gender, we need to address something that is also broken as we're heading back, and it's rebuilding our relationships. Our post-pandemic challenge for middle school and high school choirs. So we're going to do a little bit of group participation. So I'd like you to prep up and either open a side-by-side on your screen and go to, you can see the address right there, or you can text on a phone. You can text G Harrison 015. That's G Harrison 015 to 37607, and then you can play the games with us. We've got three games that we're going to play. So hopefully you'll get set up. It does show this one more time. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward, and here we go. What's the most important thing to you as you rebuild relationships in your middle school, high school choirs? These are great, great responses. All right, if you'll just take a second, I know that you have many, many more things to say. Just take a second and stop the input and just look at some of those words. Look at the ones that are popping up. The larger the word, the more often it is responding. Community, safe, feel connection, sense, trust. There's creating. Look at all these words. I don't see a heck of a lot that talks about what we're going to be singing. I see a whole lot about how we're going to be teaching our children.
Wow, look at this. 94% of people believe company culture is important to an organization's success.
I have a lot of memories from when I was a child. One that's always stuck out to me, though, was when I was about 10 years old and I was in school and I struggled. And I didn't struggle with English, math, or science. I struggled holding still. And I would try to listen, and focus, and process ideas, but I couldn't help myself. And to be honest, I would sit there and then I would just start tapping. And the students in the class would look at me and they'd say, "Hey, stop tapping." A lot of the time, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then eventually even the teachers got after me and they would yell at me and they'd say, "Clint, you have to stop tapping." It got so bad that I got sent to the principal's office for tapping. And he said to me, "Okay, maybe when you go back to class, just try sitting on your hands." So I did. I went back to class, and when I felt myself starting to tap, I did this. I sat on my hands. And that worked for about 5 seconds. One time I was tapping in class, and my teacher, Mr. Jensen, looked at me and he yelled. And he said, "Clint, stay after class." And I thought to myself, this is it. I am done. Now, I've always been the type of person that believes that a single moment in time can change a person's life. And this was one of those moments for me. And I will never forget it. And so I was sitting there with Mr. Jensen and an empty classroom. And he walked past me and he sat next to his desk and he said, "Clint, come here. I want to talk to you." And as he looked me right in the eye, he said, "No, I need you to know something. You're not in trouble. But I do have just one question that I have to ask you." And he said, "Have you ever thought about playing the drums?" And in that moment, Mr. Jensen, he leaned back and he opened the top drawer of his desk. And he reached in and he pulled out my very first pair of drumsticks. He held them in his hands and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Clint, you're not a problem. I think you're a drummer." I've never put those 6
keyboard, recording, and play drums all over the world. My whole college education was paid for with drumsticks in my hand. Just because of a single moment in time, somebody believed in me. He saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. From that moment, I learned that there's a difference between being the best in the world
And being the best for the world.
All right, let me move back to my presentation now. It's time to turn a challenge into an opportunity. We're going to talk about 5 pillars today. The impact of relationships, helping students emerge from trauma, and no matter how you cut it, this has been a traumatic situation. How we're going to rebuild trust, because without trust, there will be no recovery. We can't even pretend to have what we used to have without trust. I've been intrigued by the idea of how much trust we put in our literature and our composers. And we're going to talk to 3 composers tonight who address this issue. And then we're also going to talk about creating not just trust for the individual, but trust for the environment. So let's go. The impact of relationships. So what you see some sources along the side, and these bullet points come straight out of these sources. And one of the articles was from 2020 and one of them was 2016. And all of these points are things for us to remember. Our students have been sitting in front of Zoom screens. Our students have been taking care of younger siblings. Our students, I had one student come to me and say in the middle of the class, I can't sing right now. My baby sister's napping in the next room and my mom will kill me if I wake her up. We recognize that our kids have been someplace that we really don't want to go back again, but we also recognize the importance of these positive student-teacher relationships. We recognize that students and teachers' relationships characterized by low degree of conflict are more likely to have positive adjustment to school, perform well academically, and are less likely to demonstrate challenging behaviors. Those are from the Choosing to Be Positive article. Humans are social creatures with a deep need for interaction. We've all missed that. How many reunions have we seen on Facebook of friends getting together for the first time? That's with the children too. And children who show resilience through trauma also seem to enjoy those close relationships. So in your opinion, what's the most important word on the preceding slide? I kind of want to cry. I'm just in awe of the fact that you all are so brilliant and you're picking up on the fact that what we have to do right now is mend relationships that were broken, and they were not broken on our side. They were broken just because of what our society was going through. But here we are, we're going to take care of this right now. Let's continue. Thank you. So we do have children in trauma. This is from an Edutopia article. First of all, I just want to caution us all, we are not mental health experts. Well, some of you may be, I am not. So if I'm out of my league, I'm going to make sure I go to the right people to get help for a child that I see who's in need, or maybe for myself. Creating structure and consistency is even more important these days coming into the next school year. The consistency pieces, the structure pieces, though, may look differently. You know, in my school, we sang for 30 minutes and then we did something different. We had a whole different structure around what we did with singing. So make your structure, make it consistent. Easy transitions. I always had a display on the screen behind me so kids could see exactly where we were going. It wasn't chance, lessons were planned, and it really is a beneficial thing for kids who are distrustful for very good reason about what they may be about to enter. Develop strengths and weaknesses inquire, find out what their gifts and talents are outside of choir, go to their games, go to their basketball games, ask them how their student council things are going. Invest in them outside your class, outside of your classroom, so that they know that your web of support is all over the place. Be there for them when they come to speak to you, or they've just got an issue. You know, don't finish the email, just turn in and really be there, be present with them. This is something that you may not have considered before. I've always had an out plan. It seems like I have a lot of kids with headaches. And so we have a quiet room in my room where they could time themselves out, and it was quiet. It was just, there was nothing in there but just a chair. There were a couple stuffed animals and just an out if things just got too intense. And sometimes we're going to have to be very careful about that as our kids come back. And then lastly, and this is, I'm not, don't even look at me right now, but take care of yourself. I did not do that. Take care of yourself. You can't care for these children unless you're caring for yourself. Rebuilding trust. All right, so there are several ways that you can do this. One of the things that I found beneficial is relationship mapping. And I'm going to tell you how I did it with kids. And if I have time, I'll tell you how the staff did it. But in order to rebuild personal trust, my kids do an activity called, it's not a game, but it's called the Post-it note game. And on the Post-it note game, I give them a topic. I give them several Post-it notes. I give them a topic, and they write their response to the topic. And I usually do some fun ones and some silly ones. And then I either do a random one or do, maybe it becomes a little bit more personal. Like, what makes you nervous about approaching the concert, or how are you doing singing through your mask, or that kind of thing. This activity started when I was getting ready to take kids to an event in Dallas. We were singing for the National Junior High Middle School Conference, and I was taking my tenor bass choir and my treble choir, and there were, you know, going to be 100 of us, and we were on buses, and we were going to have an overnight. And I thought, these kids don't know each other. We've got to work through this. So in the tenor bass choir, one day I posed the question on a Post-it note: share something with your classmates that you've not shared with anybody before. And I said it can be like silly, or it can be really serious. And some of them were like, I eat the marshmallows out of my Lucky Charms first. But one little boy said, I don't know my biological dad. And the deal with the game, it's so not a game, is that if you related to that comment, you would put your hand up. 8 other little boys put their hands in the air. And I just stepped back. And the boys came together in the center, and they just put their arms around each other, and there were tears, and there was weeping, and there was rebuilding, and there was hope. That was really powerful. Daily check-ins, do meet them at the door. I know we've got emails, I know we've got this and that, but do meet them at the door. That's a really great place to just triage how they're coming into your room. Consider buddy relationships. I did Big Sister, Little Sisters in one of my treble choirs. They loved that. Consider bridge groups, where you maybe connect people across 2 choirs, so that it's not one choir versus another choir, but you've got some collegial work going on. I've had sight reading crews where they have the same quartet that they sight read with, and that just gives them a sense of comfort and security. Pen pals are also fun, and I don't mean like necessarily, you know, writing to a colleague in the district or across the country, but assign a group of kids. This week, you are the happy note writers, and all they have to do, you know, at the end of the week, they turn in a certain number of happy notes that they're going to give to other kids in their choir. But these relationships go very far in helping develop the trust again. Deliver on your promises. We not much that has been promised to us. It's maybe come to fruition, but it's come in different ways. So as you make your promises, make sure you can fulfill them, and you may want to take baby steps. Maybe this isn't the year to promise that they're going to be singing at Carnegie Hall, but maybe if they just get to sing down the hall, that'll be really great to make your first inroads into that area. And then finally, in building personal trust, you need to reconnect with the parents. They probably haven't seen you. They haven't heard from you a lot. If the parents are saying great things about you, the students are thinking great things about you, and vice versa. So the literature that has been a driver, how we put our confidence in our literature, I think probably is changing. Our society's different. Like Vic said, the voices have been so, the instruction for the voices has been absent. So I posed a question to some of my composer friends and asked them to consider, how do you think choral literature and choral performance will look in the next school year? And three of them gave some input. And so I thought we'd just take a second and listen. And I will give you a warning, there is a game at the end, so you're going to need to remember some of these concepts. So the first composer I asked the question of is Andrea Ramsey.
I don't think there are any easy answers to this question. Everyone is sort of looking into their own crystal ball and making an educated guess. But my guess is that programming will be more inclusive going forward, expanding beyond the traditional Western canon, which has long been so historically white and male, and will instead begin to showcase a better representation of humanity. We face the COVID-19 pandemic, yes, but we also have existing pandemics of racism and white supremacy. And there may be some conductors who double down on the old systems, but I believe most conductors are ready to draw a wider circle and explore more perspectives. When it comes to performances, a lot will be decided by the outcome of the current race between vaccines and variants. Those kinds of functional considerations could impact riser positioning and spacing, as well as audience capacity and our ability to have festival events. From a creative standpoint, I expect even more attention will be given to the visual component of performance, whether movement, light staging, or projected images. We are so visually oriented as a society, and tech is developing so rapidly that I don't think visual elements are going to disappear soon.
And Tim Takash, he's in Minneapolis and started Graphite Publishing.
It will take some time to get choirs back to where they were artistically before the pandemic. Numbers will be down in programs, and conductors will have to adjust the difficulty level of the repertoire they choose to perform. As a composer, that makes me think about the kind of music I'm writing and how the difficulty level and the accessibility relate to how successful it can be with the commissioning groups and future performances. So if I'm writing post-pandemic, I'm thinking that these first couple of years will be rebuilding years for choirs, and I need to tailor my compositions toward that level. This last year, educators were creative in how they use distance learning for choirs, and some of the solutions allowed them to dig deeper into the work of composers. For instance, I've done over 50 online visits this year as a composer and performer. They've also included the discussion and analysis of repertoire, active listening, critique of other groups' performances. I've always been a proponent of this kind of learning in the classroom, and I hope that we can, as we continue into the future, we can add this kind of material into the curriculum on a regular basis, rather than just as filler when we can't be singing in person. The pandemic year has also aligned with some huge social changes for music, and I hope that a more balanced representation of composers when it comes to gender and race finds its way into our choral programs in future years. Also, crowdsourcing commissioning websites like consortio.io, they're growing in popularity, and it's a very cost-effective way to bring a unique opportunity to choirs who can't afford to commission on their own. And so I think we'll see more local premieres through this method in the future.
And the final guest is Braden Ayers, who I did notice is in our session today. I would also mention that he and Andrea are also published on music through Music Spoke.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Braden Ayers. I'm here in front of my garden window. Thanks for being here today. There are a lot of things that we learned from the past year, and some that I hope we jettison, such as the official oxymoron of 2020, Zoom rehearsal. You guys know what I'm talking about. But there are also several things that I hope we keep, because during the pandemic, we saw this just massive outpouring of artistic rule breaking as so many of us were forced to deviate from kind of the standard choral playbook, right? I think as a composer and a teacher, that's actually quite exciting because it means we're beginning to think creatively, not prescriptively. I see so many more directors now who are hunting for literature that works for their very specific situation rather than simply recycling the same old things. And to me, this is good because it brings a much greater sense of intention to the literature. As choir directors, we strive for a unified sound, but I think in order to do that, we really need to embrace the individuality in our ensembles. So stop trying to make your choir sound like the group down the road, and instead give them flexible, interesting literature which teaches them solid musical concepts while also allowing them to just be emotionally expressive. That's the kind of thing that I'm interested in these days. I also hope we get weird with our literature selection. Yes, please keep doing classics, Something Told the Wild Geese, yeah. But also don't be afraid to ask for things that are off the beaten path. Don't be afraid to loosen up and really test the limits of the genre with your kids, your singers, whatever age they are. If it's corporate singing, it's choir. And I just want to see more of it. We're ready to get back, right? Let's rebuild.
And back. I hope you found those comments stimulating, challenging, brilliant. I'd like you to take a few moments and just think about some of the thoughts. What is your takeaway on rebuilding relationships through literature? That's good. And if I could ask you to thank you for your input on these, and let's just look at the word cloud just for a second. See a couple out of the boxes, reflective, creative. I love how Braden said he thinks that teachers will be making creative choices rather than prescriptive choices. As a person who's involved in a lot of reading sessions, wow, that's critical. That's a big piece. So now how are we going to create this safe harbor? The kids feel good. What kind of environment are they going to come into? That was teaching on Zoom. And this is where we all would like to be. So how do we get there? Safety for the choir. Going a little bit back to what Vic said, the voice is not a traitor. The voice has had 15 months of not doing anything, singing on Zoom without one-on-one feedback from the teacher. It just doesn't work. Let's open our room for experimentation without the expectation of excellence. As Vic was talking, the non-pitched things, sirens, silly voices, accent for the day. One of the things that I loved this year in one of my choirs was the kids in that choir developed a cheer section. And if I said, great job, they're like, yay! And I did not coach them to do this, but they recognized that they needed this in their room. That class needed a cheer section. And so what I thought, well, if I were going to teach again, like next year, which I'm not because I retired, but I would just say, okay, if you're not rehearsing, you're part of the cheerleaders. And if you're a cheerleader, your job is to really listen and, go for it. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if they all had pom-poms and all that stuff? So anyhow, model what you want, accept what can be given, and then encourage the next step. And finally, and I don't mean this to be exceptionally crude, but don't be a but. And notice but is spelled differently. But is that moment where you want to say, yeah, I want to do this with you, but let's do this, but. And in today's world, I think we've heard enough but. And I think that we need to go back to those gentle promises, go back to looking to the inside, reaching into the inside of the heart and making choices for our students that really help their need to belong and connect. I want to say thank you very much for letting me be part of this tonight. And Jamila, I am all done.
All right, thanks, Gretchen. We don't have any questions right now in the chat, and also to make sure that our last presenter has plenty of time, we're going to keep rolling. And then if there are any questions at the end and we have time, then like I said before, then we'll go ahead and take some of those. So our final presenter this evening is Chris Muntz. He is choral director at Lee Summit High School and artistic director of Cantori Kansas City. Several of you may also follow his wonderful podcast, Choralosophy. So we are delighted to have Chris with us tonight as he presents the full experience, the core of recruiting. So Chris, it's up to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamila. And thanks everyone for sticking around to the end of the webinar. And sticking it out with me. My plan tonight here is to challenge us just a little bit. I'm going to apologize in advance for anyone who has their little teacher convention notepad ready to jot down all the ideas that I'm going to give you, because you're going to be extremely disappointed with this presentation. It will be more of a philosophical discussion, which is why I called it the core of recruiting. I have these theories about the way young people's minds work. In particular, when it comes to the things that we as teachers think is what's drawing them to our class, but then there's what's actually drawing them. What is in the mind of a hormone-ridden 15-year-old as why they're there in the choir rehearsal compared to what we think they think, right? So that's kind of the inspiration for what I put together here for you tonight. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and walk through this a little bit with you. Okay. Okay, so the full experience really comes down to the concept that when it comes time for kids to enroll in our class for the next year, okay, so picture in your mind the kid who's taken your class once, and they're sitting down with their little enrollment sheet, and they're talking to their parents at home, and they're going through all the different options that they have, and they're trying to figure out what it is that they want to fill onto their sheet for next year, right? Whether we think about that moment is a big deal for kids. They think about it really deeply. Of course, we're thinking about making sure we have enough tenors in our 10th grade choir next year or whatever it is, but they're thinking about their futures. They're thinking about a lot of things. And one of the things that we want them to reflect on when they're filling out that sheet to sign up for choir again next year is we want them thinking back over the entire experience of being in our class. Probably not, there's not going to be one game we played that does it for them. There's not going to be one concert they did that does it for them. There's not going to be that one joke you told. There's not going to be that one song. It's going to be a full experience. And so we're going to dig deeper and into this, this concept of building the full experience. So I'm going to start with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said, "I've learned over the years that when you have really good people, you don't have to baby them. By expecting them to do great things, you can get them to do great things." And I build a lot of my teaching philosophy around this concept, meaning that kids will rise to the occasion that they are presented with. They absolutely will. And that's, so that becomes our question as teachers is what bar do we set? And how do we create an experience that makes them feel successful? So I've got a few here that I think are some of the things that we are tempted to believe that recruiting is about, but in my opinion, it isn't. Being the cool teacher. If you allow if you allow that to be defined by the adolescents in your room, then that will be the wrong approach, in my opinion. Now, especially if we have any young teachers out there who are just getting ready to start. I remember, I mean, it's hard for me to remember at this point, but I remember being 23 and having my first choir and having kids come up to me after class and ask if I will come over to their house and play Xbox after school. Because we were so close in age that they just did not understand that I would say no, and they didn't understand why it was not appropriate, and that's fine. It's fine to have kids like you, right? Don't misunderstand. But if you are able to create some definition of cool that is authentic, that is internal from you, kids they're not dense. They're not too dense, I should say, to be able to pick that up. They can understand the difference. So being careful not to pander to the kids, I think, is very important. Okay. Oh, there we go. I lost my mouse. Okay. The repertoire. We've talked a lot about the repertoire tonight, and that's good, but it is not a panacea. A master teacher can sell kids on any repertoire. No genre, time period, or composer will save your recruiting problems. So if we are thinking about, I've got a group of kids and they like this kind of music. Okay, that's fine. And definitely we hook kids with different types of things, but we can't stop there, right? So here's a way I would ask us to think about this. No one teacher, no group of teachers is going to have equal access to teach all types of music well enough to sell kids on it, right? It takes a little bit of self-awareness to understand what is in your wheelhouse, okay? Now, that's also a complicated thought because we also don't want to be limiting ourselves. We always want to be growing. We always want to be pushing ourselves. But this is where that self-reflection challenge comes in and says, am I ready to teach this music? Have I done the work that it takes to be ready to teach this music? Because I'll know after listening to Chris Munt's rant for 20 minutes that if I don't have myself prepared, if I don't have my background knowledge built in that genre of music, even though the kids don't know it either, they will see you fumbling. And they will see that lack of confidence and they will see that lack of competence. And that causes problems when they're sitting down with that sheet in the spring when they're deciding what classes to sign up for. So fun, and we're going to come back to that a little bit more later. Fun games, bribes, trips, non-singing activities, free days, etc. These are gimmicks. They are not, don't misunderstand again. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but they're short-lived. Right? Those are the things we have to do to get kids' attention at first, right? We want the kid with ADD who's looking all around the room, which was me when I was that age. We want them to focus in on that thing. And maybe that's a candy bar, or maybe that's a trip to New York or whatever it is. But then there has to be that next level, which is what we're going to mostly talk about tonight. And please don't try to copy after each other. It just doesn't work. We're thinking about and talking about tonight being our authentic selves. Okay. So, well, what is it? It's you. You are the recruiting tool. You are your most important recruiting tool. For every single kid in your room, every single singer in your community choir, you are the unifying factor. You are the one common denominator for every singer in your room. So we're going to start tonight by looking in the mirror. Are you teaching the music? I was talking about this before. Are you teaching the music that you can confidently and passionately deliver? And I will say again, you want, as a professional educator, you want your list. Well, think of it like a Venn diagram. You'll want your Venn diagram of things that you can confidently and passionately deliver to grow every year. Okay. But it also requires that looking in the mirror to know what's currently in the Venn diagram. Are you confident enough in yourself to be yourself in front of your students? Now, I am not your therapist, so I can't solve that problem for you, but it is a good one for you to ask yourself. Are you building relationships with individual kids in such a way that they feel valued? When they walk into your room, do they know you see them? And do they know they have something to contribute? We give you an example of this one. This is going to be, in so many ways, I'm so strange. But one of the things that I ask my chamber choir at the high school level to do at the very beginning of each school year is I ask them to go around the circle, and every single kid has to share some reason why they don't think they deserve to be in that choir. And they all go around and they talk about it. And of course, at first, when I explain the activity to them, they think, oh my, that's so negative. Why are we talking about so negative? And then what they discover, though, usually at the end of that activity, they're all crying and hugging each other. Because what ends up happening is they start to discover that they walked into the rehearsal space with a sense of not being good enough. And someone else in that room was looking at them thinking that they were so amazing and that they're the ones who didn't deserve to be there. And what we end up coming up with, we end up coming out of that activity with a really deep insight, which is that everyone in a choir has something to contribute. And so I want my kids to figure that out. It could be as simple as, I'm the really good sight reading alto, but I haven't figured out how to get my vocal folds to touch yet, so I barely make any noise. But my section needs me because I'm the one who knows exactly where we're supposed to be all the time. And then she might be really self-conscious about her lack of resonant tone when she sings. But then the girl next to her might be super self-conscious that, oh man, look at the sight reading that she can do. She's so much better than me. Right? It's the grass is always greener. And so we go through that exercise with the kids, and it's really formative for them. And what we're doing right off the beginning of the year is building those relationships. Next, peer into the mirror, is we're going to ask, how diligently are you working on your own pedagogy? And most importantly, your own musicianship. This is something that I will die on this hill. We as music educators have to continue to push ourselves to be better musicians. That could take lots of forms. It could be doing webinars like you're doing right now, engaging in the professional development, singing in a choir, even if it's your church choir, a community choir, something where you're still pushing yourself to grow and learn because you will connect with your students. How intently do you craft your advocacy message for your program to your audiences, to the important audiences? Okay, so these audiences are your potential students, your current students, your parents, and administration. So this is one, I know it's also very tempting, and it's very popular right now, very fashionable, to say that we shouldn't have to justify music. It is valuable in its own, on its own, and I agree. But the dad who writes the check for the boy to come to my choir camp doesn't know that. And so I don't care why he writes the check to send his boy to the choir camp. I just want him to get the kid there. And then I'll convince the kid that music has its own value. But I might tell that dad, hey, there's scholarship opportunities for music. Did you know that? Hey, have you heard about the brain benefits in music? Okay. I'm not going to stand in front of the choir and talk about that all the time. I'm going to let them experience music. But that dad that writes the check, we need to be able to craft our message to our audience. Okay. Here's another quote from not Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. No one knows who said that. We just know it's not Aristotle. Okay, so if that's the case, be excellent. That could look a lot of ways. It could look, and there could be a lot of definitions for excellence. And I'll try to parse that out as I go here. But it is important, and again, it goes back to what I said before, where kids, even if they are not experts, they know when they see competence. They know when they see excellence, and then they know when they are excellent. They feel like they have accomplished something. They have become competent and confident. It doesn't take a PhD to be able to recognize good music making, and kids can do that at a pretty darn young age. So we expect our students to be excellent. The biggest recruitment tool of all, and then everything that I say on this presentation tonight, in my opinion, it all leads up to this. Is competence. When your students feel powerful, when they feel competent and able to achieve in your class, they are more likely to check the box to take the class again next year. If they feel like they are horrible at singing, they won't. It's really as simple as that. Now, that doesn't mean we lie to them. We don't tell them they're better than they are. That's really important because, again, that goes back to the idea that I said before. They know. The kids know. if they're struggling and if they're not, but they've got to feel like they're growing. They've got to feel powerful. They've got to feel like when they have a piece of music in front of them, that they can tear through it, right? And that takes work, and that takes work on ourselves. That takes work on our kids, expecting that excellence. Now, I mentioned this before, hinted at it a little bit, but excellence has to be defined by you, within your environment and with your resources. None of our programs are the same. We don't all teach in the same situation. If we run into that Facebook comparison danger that I was talking about before, where if we set a bar here because we saw some choir on it in the county next door that has a much better infrastructure for instruction, for scaffolding, all that kind of stuff, and we compare ourselves to that, this is a losing game. Because your kids, ultimately, you're going to create a bubble, a choral music bubble for them within your environment. They're not going on Facebook to see how the choir teacher that you're rivals with from back in undergrad is doing with their choir. Your high school kids and junior high kids are not doing that. They're experiencing the version of choral music that you present to them. And so that excellence has to be your standard, right? The one that you set for yourselves. I would say the only great sin in this category is just not having one, not having a standard, not having a bar that we're constantly striving for, because kids they want to be pushed. Pursue the professional development that pushes you. This is really important. If you don't feel, I tell my students this all the time, but if you are not confused, you're not learning. Once you have crossed the threshold on a topic that you are no longer confused, you can put that in your I learned it box, but then you need to move on to something else. And you're constantly being pushed. And I think that is true of us. We model that as educators. Your musicianship level matters. It is your trade, your craft, and your product. Even young kids can smell it when their teacher is struggling on it. And so work on it, like forever. Until you can't anymore. That's actually one of my favorite things about being a musician, is that I've got models in my life. My 92-year-old college professor, grandmother, piano professor, she's obviously retired now, but she is still teaching piano lessons at age 92, and she practices 3 to 4 hours a day. Now, that's an example, but it's one of my examples of the idea that that as a musician, my shelf life is as long as I can keep hearing the music in my head. Well, what a great message to send to kids about learning in general, right? What if we could use music as a way to convince kids that learning is forever? Look at me. My beard hair has doubled since the pandemic started in terms of grayness. And I will still go back and show the kids next year that my learning and my growth is just getting started. And that is infectious for kids. Students are more likely to want to participate in an activity when they perceive it as good or high quality. The basketball team has a lot less trouble recruiting after they win the state championship. And so you do have to sell a product. That we bristle when we hear language like that in the education community, but it's the reality. It is our job to go to these kids who have tons of options that don't involve us and convince them that we are the best fit for them because of what we can bring to their lives. And if we believe in it, which we say we do, we got to sell it. Not every program needs to look or sound the same. I think I might have included enough bullet points now to make it clear that we shouldn't all look the same. This is really, really important. The choral pie is huge. And what I think is fantastic about some of those quotes at the end of Gretchen's presentation is they all in some way were referencing the idea that the choral pie just keeps growing and growing. And within that bigger and bigger pie, we are slicing more slices. And the beautiful thing about the world that we live in is we are not living in a fixed pie. More of one thing doesn't have to mean less of another thing. Right? That's that scarcity mentality concept. And so this bullet point hits that as well, which is that not every choir program, even at the choir program level, needs to look or sound the same to be considered successful, right? I would say all these principles apply whether you are the more stand up straight in choir robes and stoles and sing Lutheran music kind of a program, or if you're a jazz choir, or if you're a pop a cappella group, any of the genres, the sub-genres in choral music, in my mind, are under that big growing pie umbrella. of choral music. And as we kind of get to the true core here, we just have to be ourselves. My own personal story and journey on this topic is that when I started teaching at age 22, I guess I was 22 when I first started. It was at a high school choir program, and I taught for a couple of years and learned a lot of things to not ever do and as a teacher ever again for those couple of years. And then I went back and got my master's degree. Okay, so I quit teaching for a year and a half or so, and went back, got my master's degree. And when I came out of my master's degree in my mid-20s, I had done some professional singing by that point. I had done a master's in conducting and did a really fancy performance practice thesis. And I did a lot of like recital work and lots of cool things that made it so that when I came into the choir classroom again, in my mind, the way I was going to win over my students was I was going to impress them with all that I knew about music. And you know what? The 2 or 3% of music nerd kids in there, it worked. Okay. But for the average kid, it was whoosh. And not only was it whoosh, but it was, who is this guy and who does he think he is? Like that was the reaction that I had to work through for a couple of years. And it was probably a 3 or 4 year process of me figuring out that version of me that I was presenting to those kids is not the real me. What that is a collection of knowledge that I have acquired. That's not me. That's not the same thing. And I had to figure out how to win the kids over by getting them to understand that I cared about them first. Okay. Once they figured that out, then they actually did think it was pretty cool to have a smart choir teacher like that. But up until that point, they didn't care. They just didn't care. And so what I think the turning point for me in my career was that moment where I felt like the version of Chris Muntz that is at home with my bio kids is the same one that is sitting here talking to you right now, is the same one who walks into my choir classroom, is the same one that hangs out with my friends on the weekends smoking at my barbecue grill, right? It's the same person. And I can tell you that was a turning point, because what that started to do for me when I could get to that place in front of my students was I became a better musician, because I was no longer filtering the version of me that I thought they needed to see, because that takes a lot of mental energy. And so now I get to free up all that mental energy for the music. And that's a beautiful thing. And that is something that we should be striving for. And yes, I'm talking about that in a presentation about recruiting, because kids can smell it. They can smell it when it's not you. Only an authentic presentation of oneself can lead to authentic relationships. This takes us back to that relationship piece from the beginning. And every presenter tonight in some way has made this connection, right? These relationships are critical. The kid who's sitting there with his recruiting or her recruiting sheet, they need to feel seen. Now, they don't all have to feel like they're the best. I mentioned this before. They don't all have to feel like they're the best sight reader. They don't all have to feel like they're the most beautiful solo voice. They don't all have to feel like they're the choir president, but they have to feel like they have something to contribute. I told this story already, so I'll skip that. I got excited. Take an interest in your students as unique humans. They will reciprocate. I think that's an important step. You know you're making progress when they start asking you questions about your life. That's when you know that you've gotten through to them, because they're starting to see you as a fellow human in the room. This is just some visual aid. This is some fun stuff from the end of our school year. A little bit about my situation this last year. I've heard some mention already tonight about the varying situations we had throughout the year. We had about, the weirdest mix of all the things this year. We had about a half of the school year was all virtual. We had about a quarter of the year that was hybrid, and about a quarter of the year where we were fully in person. And then the masks came off for like the last 2 weeks of school, and we got to actually see kids' faces. So we had a little bit of everything. And so there was just a lot of joy there towards the end. So one of my last little bits of advice here tonight is to be visible. And I'm going to kind of parse out what that means just a little bit. And this is part of being integral in the students' lives. This one is kind of tricky because I think we underestimate both the positives and negatives sometimes of social media. It's a powerful tool. It's also super toxic. But a social media presence in a recruiting sense matters. Not because your colleagues, like I said before, not because your colleagues need to see what your choir is doing, but because the students do. They need to see what it's like. And the parents of your students, who are the ones, again, they're the dad that's going to write the check for the choir camp. They need to see some kind of visualization of the product. Okay. Because again, people gravitate towards things that they perceive as good. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's performance examples. It could just be you having fun with the students. It could be I know in my school district, we're encouraged to have program monikers social media accounts. Okay. So rather than if for example, if I were to put up something that my choir did, it would be on the Lee Summit High School Twitter account. It wouldn't be on my Twitter account. It would be on the school's Twitter account. And they encourage us to do that because they tell us, and I agree, that in our community, we are getting the word out about the stories that our students are experiencing every day. And that's important. Are you active? Are you an active presence in your community, in your school? And can you then leverage that when your program needs help? In other words, when there is a situation where you need the money, where you are up against a faculty position being cut from your program, when you're up against some kind of a challenge, and as we are all under right now and will be under more and more over the next couple of years, it is a lot harder. And I'll just say it bluntly because that's the only way I know how to do it. My bosses know that taking stuff from my program is going to be very uncomfortable for them. And that's because I've built a ton of community support for the program, right? And that's not like threatening, but when they look at our program, they're like, no, we're not going to touch that. And I think that involves building social capital in the community. Basically, it means being indispensable, being the type of employee, being the type of community presence that they just can't do without, because that is a part of recruiting that is going to be very, very relevant in the next few years. And now just a few more tangential things, and then I'll be done. So as Jamila mentioned, I do host a podcast, and this is not an intentional plug on the podcast, but I've done so much ranting on these topics already. I just wanted to let you know that they are out there. Another thing that's tangential to recruitment is the way you grade. And so I've done several episodes so far on the way that we put together grading so that kids can be pushed towards growth, but also feel like they can do well. So I'd invite you to check that out too, because that does matter. So the system that you use to grade sends a lot of messages to them about what's important and whether or not they can feel powerful and competent in the class. The concept of anti-fragility. Eric Barnum and I did a conversation on this, and this is really important. Anti-fragility being the concept that when humans are challenged, they come back stronger. Okay, whereas a cup, if it's made of glass and you break it, it's fragile. You drop it, it just breaks. Okay, a plastic cup, if you drop that, it doesn't break, but it doesn't come back stronger. It's resilient, which is another word that we like to use. This is a term invented by a mathematician and philosopher named Nassim Taleb. And he describes that term because he's not an English speaker, and he came up with the term anti-fragility because he thinks we don't have a term that describes that in English very well. And the concept that if the cup were to break, what if it were to reform as a better cup? And so that we talked about that concept, and that's, I would say, very important to my recruiting process. And then lastly, we have to let the music speak to them. We let the music speak to the kids, being very careful not to do the speaking for the music, because we don't know what the music might say to each individual kid in our room. And my philosophy is that I don't want to get in the way of that experience, that touching of the music for the first time, because that's a sacred moment that my teachers allowed me to have and to experience and to explore when I was their age, and I want that for them as well. And that's just some contact information, but I'm done. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. And we don't really have any questions, but I would also, we've got just a couple of minutes, so I want to take this opportunity to say thanks so much to Vincent Oakes and Gretchen Grace Harrison, and also to Chris Muntz for their insightful presentations today. Once again, if you missed the beginning of this and you are on Facebook Live, remember that if you do have any questions in on the Facebook Live, that the presenters will be checking that once this webinar concludes, and then over the next few days as they have the opportunity. So also to let you know, this webinar was recorded and it will be available on the ACDA website, as well as any handouts that the presenters wish to share in addition to the PowerPoints. So you will be able to see this on the ACDA website. Also, to let you know, coming this fall, the ACDA Education and Communication Committee, we will host another webinar in this Looking Forward series, and this will be a focus for K-5 choral directors. So please spread the word to your elementary choral colleagues that this is on the horizon. And also, if you are in this webinar tonight and you're a K-8 person or a K-12 choral educator, we hope that you come back for that webinar also as well, because I think once again, you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of great ideas. I'm really excited. I'm not ready to say the presenters yet, but I'm really excited about who's going to be presenting for that elementary session. And once again, I'm Dr. Jamila McWhorter, and you can contact me with other things you would like to see in the area of professional development. So once again, thank you for joining us this evening, and please enjoy the rest of your evening and good night. Thank you.